Few horror writers have the body of work and the accolades to stack up against the monolith that is Stephen King. But my guest, Stephen Graham Jones, sure is catching up. This Blackfoot Native American New York Times best-selling author has written nearly 30 books in all sorts of genres, predominantly horror, sci-fi, and crime. His trophy shelf is buckling under the weight of his vast collection of writing awards, prizes, and fellowships, most notably the Ray Bradbury Award from the Los Angeles Times, the Bram Stoker Award, and the Shirley Jackson Award. Here's Stephen Graham Jones. Stephen Graham Jones, welcome to the Stephen Kingdom. Thank you for talking with me today. So what's your first memory of reading Stephen King?
I guess I was 16 years old. This must have been 88. It could have been 89. But I've somehow come home with the Tommyknockers hardback, big old book. And I think I bought the book because I saw that word Tommyknockers and I didn't know what that meant. So picked it up. It looked fun. I was reading a lot of science thrillers at the time. I thought this might be in the vein of those science thrillers. And I ended up staying up all night long reading that book. It terrified me, it just chilled me to the bone. And it thrilled me too. I think that's something that horror can do. It can make you afraid, but also make you reach out with part of yourself, And Tommyknockers did that for me, and it still does. I like that novel a lot. After that, it was, I had so much catching up to do. And I'm probably still not completely caught up, but I bet I've read, King's probably got plus 60 novels. I bet I've read 53 of them, something like that.
So the title, The Tommyknockers, was enticing to you. Did the name of the author, Stephen King, did that mean anything to you at the time?
I grew up way out in the country. We didn't have bookstores. We didn't have a library, I guess. There was a school library. And my family, we weren't the kind who gave books for Christmas. I would usually get, I remember knives and gloves were the two big things I got. If I knew about King, then I probably thought his last name being so large on the cover was an earned title more than a proper name.
Yeah, I remember the first time when I was young hearing the name Stephen King and it was synonymous with horror, and I almost thought the name sounded made up. The king of horror, Stephen King. It just seemed too aesthetically pleasing and too perfect. So yeah, there was a period there where I almost thought that maybe it was a pen name of some kind.
Yeah.
So you were an avid reader early on, but growing up in rural Texas, I can't imagine there were that many books around. How did you feed the reading beast growing up?
I had always been just reading soup cans and, the back of magazines. Anything I could get my hands on, I would just devour with my eyes and my mind and my heart. But when I was 11 years old, one of my uncles, he noticed that I was always trying to read. So he took me down the hall in his house and opened up his linen closet, and there weren't sheets and blankets in there. It was just front to back, side to side, mass market paperbacks, mostly Mac Bolan, Louis L'Amour, Conan the Barbarian. He told me I could get 3. When I brought those 3 back, I could get 3 more. And I went through his whole closet like that in groups of 3. But no, the place that I got my own books after his closet was probably once every 6 weeks. I would go to town with my grandmother, and she would go to the used bookstore, a place called Mrs. B's in Midland, Texas. And she would give me $2, and I could, the books were 15 cents or so, and I just stack them up with the most lurid covers I could find. But yeah, my uncle was the only reader in the family, pretty much.
I'm always fascinated with where kids get their interests, especially when nobody in their family seems to have those interests.
Yeah, I think it's just a need for the fantastic, for the amazing. And we all find it in different ways. Some people find it on a dirt bike. Some people find it playing with snakes.
Why did it have to be snakes?
I happen to find it in the pages of a book.
Did your interest in reading come before your interest in writing?
No, I didn't start writing until I was 19. That was my first story. Growing up where I did, the only 2 choices you had were to either be a farmer or work in the oil field. And so I kind of decided I wanted to be a farmer. So that was the only thing I was ever going to be. I never planned on, there was no route to being a writer. I knew I was a reader, and that was kind of where it stopped. I never had any plans on being a writer.
So you were an avid reader growing up. What compelled you to start writing in the first place?
What happened was I was sitting in the burn unit ICU for 3 days and 3 nights waiting for somebody to live or die, and I had a spiral and a pen with me, and I got bored. I read all the magazines in the room, so I took up my pen, opened up my spiral. I was bored. I started writing a story. When I went back to my composition 2 classroom on Monday after missing 2 classes, I didn't have my personal essay I was supposed to have done, so I ripped those pages out of my notebook, handed them to the teacher to show that I had been writing anyways, and she liked it enough that she typed it up and entered it into a departmental contest, which I won. And that was like totally blindsided me. I had no idea you could turn words and lies into money.
Make a lot of money.
Yeah, I do all right for myself.
And so after that, I was like, I want to do this all the time. This is a pretty good gig.
No, everything's fine. Hey, listen, I quit.
What's your view on the relationship between reading and writing? So when you start writing something, do you cease all reading? Do you use reading as a way to kind of take a break from writing or inspire you in case you get writer's block or anything like that?
What is it? Stephen King says that if you don't read, then you don't have the tools to write. It's something like that. And I completely subscribe to that. I'm a compulsive reader. I still read the same way I did when I was 10 years old. Just anything I can find, I inhale with my eyes. 5 minutes before this, I was in my backyard reading the novel, and I'll be back to it this evening. I just love to read. I think if I ever stop reading, then I'll probably also stop writing, because they do fuel each other in a really, essential way, I think.
Do you find that your writing style changes at all depending on what you're reading at the time?
It can, yeah. There's 2 writers I won't read while I'm writing. That's Philip K. Dick and Kurt Vonnegut Jr. Every time I read anything that they've written, I want to just quit. I'm like, why am I even trying? They already did everything I want to do,
What was it about King himself that kept you coming back to his books? Because I know whenever I read my first Stephen King book, I half wanted to not like him because I knew that he'd written so much, and I thought, well, okay, if I don't like him, then I won't have all these books to read down the line. But obviously that was not the case, hence the Stephen Kingdom.
Yeah. No, I had the same thing. Like when I first read Lolita by Nabokov, I thought this is the most amazing thing in the world. So I burned through everything Nabokov had written, and it made me sad. And with King, what lured me into him initially was in Tommyknockers, those egg crates he uses, the egg cartons, I guess, and he puts those D batteries in them and wires them together in some alien way. That to me was so evocative, and I really wanted to try it a whole lot. So it's just number one, it's just the sheer imagination. Number two, what I really respect about King's writing, even today, is that there's always kind of I guess you could call it a working class sensibility to it, like when his characters have money problems, it doesn't feel like the editor in his brain said, oh, they need to be under some strife. It feels like he understands what those money problems are like. He doesn't have money problems anymore, but he understands what it's like to be digging in the couch for one more dime so you can buy a dollar burger down the road or something. And that really connected with me, and it connects with me still in all of his books.
I've noticed that in your writing too, and I'm wondering where that comes from, and if you, because of your rural upbringing, because of your blue-collar upbringing, if that's something that's very deeply ingrained in you, or if you find yourself having to maybe constantly remind yourself of that upbringing to instill that in your characters and in your writing.
I think once you have dug in the couch for dimes to buy that one burger you're gonna get that day, it becomes part of your DNA.
Oh, Mr. DNA, where did you come from?
And you probably can shake it if you try, but I feel like if I were to ever walk away from that, I'd be walking away from who I am at the core, And so I think I probably purposefully hold on to it a little bit anyways. I don't try to leave it behind anyways. I'll tell you the truth, I'm not sure I could. I would feel like I was betraying who I used to be, if that makes sense.
One thing that I think is really interesting about Stephen King is that he tends to remember where he gets his ideas. You see that a lot in his afterwords, especially to his novella collections and his short stories, is he remembers what experience in his life or something that inspired those specific stories or ideas. And I noticed in your afterword to The Only Good Indians, it's a very long afterword, and you remember very specifically certain songs and how they played a role in the book, certain people you knew, experiences, characters that made their way into the book as well. And I'm wondering just how that works for you, if you're just kind of a blank slate when you set down to write and just express experiences start coming to you, or if there are certain experiences in your life, songs that are so seminal and important to you that you just need to find a way to get them into your writing somehow.
It'll happen randomly. I'll just be listening to some music and CCR or Def Leppard or George Strait will come on and they'll say a line that it kind of lodges in my head, and pretty soon some version of that or the context around that line will find its way onto the page. And I feel like I'm being dishonest if I don't say, hey, that's probably from Def Leppard. I feel like I'm pretending like I came up with it all on my own, which I didn't.
Yeah, and especially somebody like you're so upfront about where you get your ideas. I feel like if you didn't own up to it, that your fans who tend to be like-minded and be attracted to what you're writing, they'd probably catch you on it anyway.
Yeah, I suspect they do, yeah.
One of my goals with the Stephen Kingdom is almost to spread the gospel of Stephen King and make people aware that he's not just a horror writer, even though that's perfectly fine if that's all he was, but a lot of people who may not like horror or be turned off by it would actually enjoy his writing. And I'm wondering if you've ever had any sort of success stories of converting somebody who may not like Stephen King, may not like horror, into becoming a Stephen King fan.
I have, and it's been in the classroom because I assigned Stephen King. I've done a haunted house course where, of course, I teach The Shining, and I've done just a general horror course where sometimes it'll be The Shining, sometimes it'll be one of his other novels or stories. And yeah, a lot of the students come in with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, not against him specifically, but against him as an idea. Like he's just such a monolith on the landscape of 20th century fiction that they think, of course I've got to try to push that over. But then I show them that like The Shining is a very personal novel to Stephen King, it seems like, I don't want to presume, but I show them that, Jack Torrance's struggles are very real. He's a real person. And a lot of them come over, and they say, I shouldn't have had that prejudice in the first place. And so I figure job done,
Oh yeah. King is very teachable for sure. Well, do you consider yourself a horror writer? Do you like to put that kind of a label on yourself?
I'm very aware that anytime the marketplace puts a label on you, that's also a handle by which they can throw you away, So I'm of course hesitant to, let labels glom onto me. I take kind of Joe Lansdale's advice. People were trying to lump him in with the splatterpunk in the 90s, and he would always resist that. He'd say, I wrote a splatterpunk story. That doesn't mean I'm a splatterpunk writer. And I think he was really wise to do that because splatterpunk kind of tailed off and Joe Lansdale kept right on going, I do consider myself a horror writer. I write fantasy, science fiction, literary. I write in a lot of different genres, but there will usually be somewhere in the piece a lot of horror technique that rises to the surface, whether it be gore, suspense, whatever. It always bubbles up. And I guess another way to say it is horror comes more naturally to me. Whereas when I'm writing a crime novel, I sometimes have to remember that, you can't behead everybody in the room. You gotta leave somebody alive. This isn't a horror novel.
It does seem to be the case that horror or any horror element in a novel, no matter how small, seems to almost overtake everything else. So even if something tends to be more on the funny side or thrilling, that if there's an element of horror, it becomes a horror novel.
Yeah, if it carries this or that trigger warning, and that trigger warning is kind of associated with the horror genre, then it becomes a horror novel, for sure. But talking about that character-centric angle, that is definitely something I learned from Stephen King. If you look at his novels, like if you do them, I don't know, if you apply statistics to them or look at them in terms of percentages, he'll probably spend the first, 32% of every novel basically saying, meet this character. This is this character's situation. This is their context. This is their issues. This is what's important to them. And after that, then he drops them into the meat grinder. And it's just a roller coaster after that, of course. But what I learned from Stephen King, from reading Stephen King, is that horror is not about propping up carving dummies and knocking them down. It's about putting real people into dangerous teeth. And the real people is the important part, really.
I seem to remember a quote from King, and I'm paraphrasing here, something like, he doesn't want you to be scared by something, but he wants you to be scared for people.
Oh, that's wonderful. I like that.
It must be the film student side of me that anytime I'm reading, I'm always imagining, like, how would that become a movie or a TV show? How would you adapt that? And I feel like that might be why Stephen King is so difficult to adapt, because he is so character-driven, and so a lot of that can tend to get lost when you're portraying it on the screen.
Well, I think the new streaming world is allowing Stephen King's adaptations to breathe in a different way, because over a course of a limited series or a longer series like Mr. Mercedes, you can get a character's interior on the outside in a more layered way than you possibly can in a feature film. Feature films have strict conventions, and you have to do, I'm not talking like Blake Snyder, you don't have to do this on page 25, but I think it's easier to get inside a character's head in a television series than it is in a feature film.
Yeah, I think a lot of character-driven stuff is better suited for the streaming world for sure. Yeah, especially your work as well. You have these characters in something like The Only Good Indians where you make us care for them and we're with them for so long, and then you kill them, which, might not be a great thing for a movie if you kill one of the main characters halfway through. So when you teach Stephen King, what's one thing that you like to impart on your students about him? Even if they don't like him, what's one thing that you like to leave them with about him and his impact on literature?
The big takeaway I try to give them on a craft level or a technique level is to look at the end of Stephen King's novels, because there will usually be what we think is the end of the horror, but then there will be one last scare, like in Scream.
This is the moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
He's really good, like The Shining is a good example of that, where, the hotel has been exploded by the boiler, and then afterwards, Dick Halloran kind of gets infused or tranced out with the evil of the Overlook and almost does some violence to Danny. That's that second scare. Stephen King is really good at staging that when you're not expecting it and from an unexpected source. So technique-wise, that's wonderful. In a larger sense, I think the lesson we can all take from Stephen King is to do good in the world. I think he legitimately tries to make the world a better place. It's not that he leverages his platform or his celebrity status or anything. I think he just wants the world to be better, and he sees things that are wrong with it, so he calls them out. And we should all be so bold, I think.
Right, absolutely. And I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with him or who only know him as a horror writer are usually pretty surprised when they find out how generous he is, how giving and charitable he is, because I think a lot of people hear Stephen King and they think of some creepy guy in a basement just clattering away at his typewriter.
I think that about all horror. Everybody thinks all horror writers that we just sit around sharpening our knives looking for who we can stab, What does Stephen King say? It's some interview where he gets asked, how do you sleep at night? And he says, I sleep fine because I give my nightmares away, and that's what I found working in the horror community for all these years. Some of the best people I've known, they're in horror. I remember once I was crossing an intersection in a car with Joe Lansdale, and a homeless man was pushing a bike across the intersection, really crowded place, big city, and the homeless man fell down. He had a bad knee, it looked like, and he just tumbled over. And before he hit the ground almost, Joe Lansdale was out the car and running to help that guy, And I think so many horror writers are like that. They care about the world, and they care about the world enough that they want to make it scary and exciting too.
That's right, yeah, because I think if you're getting scared on the page, then maybe that makes life not so scary by comparison. Yeah. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for chatting with me. It's been a pleasure. Many thanks to Stephen Graham Jones for taking the time to chat with me today. Don't forget to check out the Stephen Kingdom podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like to throw in a few bucks to keep the Stephen Kingdom up and running, be sure to support our Patreon, where our patrons get access to all sorts of exclusive content, including extended and deleted scenes, early access to episodes, and your name in the end credits. Long days and pleasant nights, Constant Watchers.